research webinar series. If you missed the first presentation of Dr. Maria Kelly's on Monday, we are going to upload them on our YouTube channel at the end of this week. Today, we have with me the UConn's Agriculture and Resource Economics professor, Dr. Charles Tao. Dr. Tao is an environmental economist with extensive experience in land use and using housing market data to value resources and amenities. His primary research interests include climate adaptation, water quality, and policy evaluation. He's going to talk about real estate values, tax revenues, and climate change-induced retreat from flood zones. Just to give you a heads up that you are all muted, and you can type your questions to chat box or Q&A box and send it to all panelists so both Charles and I can see it. Without further ado, Dr. Tal, the floor is yours.
Okay, everyone can hear me, right?
Yes,
we
can hear you.
Okay. So thanks for coming to this webinar. I will make a note that I cannot see anyone, so please put as many questions as you need in the chat box. We'll try to get to them in the end. Yaprok's already said the title. I just want to acknowledge that my RA, Shin did a lot of this work, and Nancy Boxtel definitely helped with a lot of legwork, boots on the ground, and Stephen, of course. We thank Circa and Delta Aparo actually for helping to finance this. As a note, Shin, actually, I don't know if he's on here or not, but he'll be defending his dissertation tomorrow, and part of this work is in his dissertation. So let's go forward. Here we go. A little bit of background. This will be no new information for folks on this kind of webinar, but sea level rise is now crossed into a different state in a sense. We are now actively making policy to address sea level rise as opposed to arguing about whether or not it will happen. Pressures are mounting from the private sector, not just from the nonprofit sector. The insurance and financial markets are pushing now for sea level rise acknowledgement in their policies. And there's a strong push for the federal insurance rates to become actuarially fair if the Senate would allow that to happen. Schumer recently stopped part of that from going into place. What are we looking at in Connecticut? Recent analysis from the Union of Concerned Scientists using actually the data set that we're using puts about 4,500 homes and 10,000 residents at risk of chronic inundation by 2045. About 3.4 billion in value and 52 million in tax revenue come from these homes. So this is really a slide to say this isn't a distant issue anymore. When we go to 2045, when we go to 2050, these things aren't going to stop. The water's not going to stop rising. So that's part of this report, is to note that these numbers increase essentially exponentially to 2100. So what are we doing? We wanted to focus our analysis or our thinking of this project around what is it like to live in the floodplain? What is it like to buy a house in the floodplain? There are a lot of players in the floodplain. There's a federal role, a state and local role, and most importantly, people who purchase these homes, they play a role here. What's the federal role? In a nutshell, FEMA is going to be doing much of this. They're going to map these floodplain zones. They determine the insurance rates. They set some kind of minimum regulation requirements. The states can then move above. And obviously, they're going to help in a recovery after an event. The state and local role, they bear the burden of enforcing much of this FEMA regulations and interpreting the state regulations and where they collide with the FEMA regulations. The state of Connecticut is very proactive in the sense that they require structural elevation to exceed BFE, and many communities exceed it by several feet. There is a disparity essentially in the number of, in the resources that varied communities have along the coast of Connecticut. Communities with more resources tend to have access to more programs and enforcement, more capacity to enforce these. And I bring this up with regard to the 50% rule and certain look-back periods, as well as the CRS, the community rating system, which requires an investment from the community. Towns and the people. So the Connecticut coast, unlike a lot of the analysis, at least where economists have done a lot of work, Florida, North Carolina, Texas, they have very different coastlines than the coast of Connecticut. Connecticut is a very non-smooth, and it's not a linear, nice gradient along the coastline. So there's a lot of heterogeneity. There's a lot of heterogeneity in topography. As we mentioned, there's a lot of heterogeneity in the housing stock, the age of the housing stock, and the quality of the housing. And then within the state, so we're talking about There's some differences in the community's ability to afford to invest in resiliency. Of the 24 coastal towns, 5 are in the top 10% for Connecticut localities in income, and 9 are in the lower half. So there's a disparity there as well, some heterogeneity there. Again, differences in how adaptation have occurred, and we're talking about elevations essentially here. We see more elevations in the west side of Connecticut than the eastern side of Connecticut, in part related to Sandy and some other events that impacted those areas more directly. Connecticut, like other life in the floodplain, there are undeniable amenity values to living in the floodplain to some residents, and there are undeniable risks essentially for all residents by definition. So we're going to be using the housing market data. We're going to be looking specifically at transactions in the housing market. And this is where I say a loose aggregation of individual decisions, because these individual decisions are essentially the decision to sell, the decision to buy. And we're going to use those to measure the response to amenity and risk signals. Our overarching objectives, we narrow these to 2. They're kind of more in the fact sheet. We're going to do a lot of data work first to conduct an analysis, an initial analysis, in order to get some parameter values and test some hypotheses about floodplain amenities. Things that we've taken some time to measure include waterfront, being near the waterfront, and these are were actually done by going along the coastline and actually seeing this house is on the water, not distance measure. In the much of the literature, they take a simple distance measure from the coast. You can be close to the coast and not actually be waterfront. So we have a more granular measure than is typically used. Structural elevation insurance requirements. I'll talk about a little bit of the data in a second. Second, we're going to take these parameters and some other parameters from the literature. We're going to conduct a quick simulation looking over some retreat scenarios to see how those would play out, essentially to gauge how much of the amenity, removing a house, how much amenity gain is distributed to the neighboring houses. So this is a quick bit of the Viewshed. I left this in for Shin-Chen since this is one of the things that he spent a lot of time on early on. What are we doing with regard to the view? This is a new structure for economists. I have an example here. You can see, let me spec on my little red arrow. Here's the house we're talking about, and this is essentially a picture of what the Viewshed variables look like. So the white here is a section of view that can be seen from this house. So the Viewshed measure is taken from the house itself, and you can see it does a good job with relation to this house where these other 2 homes are blocking the view of the Long Island Sound. So that's what we care about. We have 4 different variables measuring view, which I won't take the time to go into here. Just to show you how well this can work, this is a place near the coast. This is the property we're looking at the view for. And because this property is on a hill, you can see that they actually have a measurable view of the Long Island Sound. If we take another property that's slightly off the hill, you can see they have virtually no view of Long Island Sound. So this is one of the measures that we did via GIS in addition to the waterfront measurement. So a simple hedonic, this is the term for the type of model that we're using. We're going to look at observed transaction prices based on property characteristics, things about the neighborhood and the transaction itself. So the characteristics are things like lot size, structure size, house amenities, age, the view from the house we talked about, elevation, those things. The neighborhood will be wrapped up schools. You could put CRS attributes in some cases in there. Proximity to amenities and disamenities, we do a lot of that. And then, of course, we have the transaction itself. So we'll count for some seasonality and timing. And importantly, we'll talk about, at least in the report, we'll talk about financing. So people that buy a home using borrowed money versus self-financing. Here's a quick look at just some of the raw data that we've measured, the coastfront, riverfront, and waterfront across the street. That's another thing I didn't really mention, but Connecticut is unique, and you have houses that are directly on the water, and you have houses that have a road between themselves and the water. And so we actually took some time to measure that to account for that difference in amenity from that. So here you can see the floodplain houses, quite a bit more expensive than outside the floodplain along these. This is just for the coastal communities of Connecticut. And the percentages map out. We're just saying that you do have obviously some coastfront out of floodplain houses because some places are on elevated land. riverfront, waterfront across street, you see the numbers for in the floodplain are obviously higher, and that will get to our estimation strategy as well too. Here are the characteristics. There's a list, a somewhat exhaustive list of what we put into the model. Lots of distances to amenities, highways, beaches, water bodies, types of development, airports, et cetera. Some notion of what's in the neighborhood with regard to open space, developed land, forest, and then stuff related to the house itself, building age, condition, pool, size of garage, et cetera. I'm not going to show you any equations in this, so let's jump straight to the results. This is from, you can think of these as just a straight regression, linear regression in a sense. It's a little more complicated than that. We do have a matching procedure which we can talk about, or you can always read the appendices to the report. In short, what we're finding from the model is purchasing a home in the floodplain comes with a slight discount. So homes sell at about a 2% discount is one way to interpret these coefficients. So that is in line with much of the literature. What we see differently is we get some measure of what is the premium, the amenity premium for being on the coast. It's huge, right? So you shouldn't interpret these exactly as 40%, but for the sake of this presentation, we can say it's about, your home is worth about 40% more if you have direct coast access. It's 26% more if you have a river, but not quite direct coast access. And the difference between direct coast and having a road in front of your house before the coast is significant. It's the difference of 16%, give or take. So this is important. This is one big chunk of the work we did, data work and estimating the model. And this is the only view variable. Of course, these views are all collinear in some sense, but we do get a positive value for the view angle. So the more degrees of space you can see at Long Island Sound, the more valuable your property is in a transaction. So let's move to the second part of this and what we're supposed to do with the project. Shoreline Retreat. It's been discussed for a long time for an adaptation approach. It's found limited use. Why? Well, there are grants available, but it's expensive. It takes time to get these grants and to seek them out and to manage them. Obviously, and what a lot of people probably will have questions on and what we looked at, there are revenue implications to removing homes. And finally, they do require voluntary participation from the owners. So they need someone to say, I want to be bought out, I want to participate, unless you're going to use an eminent domain, which to my knowledge has not been done yet. Again, there's mounting pressure to begin using this practice. The Army Corps of Engineers has made a note that they will not start certain investment unless properties are sought to be removed. The community rating system gives you a very strong bump if you have a program in place. Private sector pressure, again, just noting the mortgage and bond ratings are starting to show up if communities are not engaging in resiliency efforts. Nonprofit conservation groups are also active in this space to some degree. On the other end, there are homeowners that live in repetitive loss properties and would be more ready and willing to retreat. We see some of this in the experience in West Haven that Connecticut's had, and New York's program between Staten Island and the Rockaways has been very active since Sandy, actually. All right, so what are some of the benefits that might affect home values? Using our parameters, we're going to calculate neighboring home value changes based on improved views for surrounding properties, changing the status of waterfront and near waterfront. We're also going to borrow a couple of things from the literature, and we'll talk about this when we get to talk about the retreat scenarios, access to new open space, and removal of frequently flooded houses under the assumption that those houses are probably slightly more dilapidated than the neighborhood, for example. Some of the other benefits, energy service demand, infrastructure, floodplain, groundwater protection, we're not counting any of these. And importantly, we're not doing anything with equilibrium reinvestment effects. So as the neighborhood changes, you may see more investment in the houses that remain. Those are all big numbers that we're going to say really nothing about in this report. It's just too complicated at this phase. So now where we spent, I don't know, a year of discussion, and thanks to Circa and the state really for not telling us how to define the retreat scenarios. That was a blessing and a curse, because once we got to the point of defining retreat scenarios, we're like, this is hard, actually. This is quite difficult to figure out how to do this. One place that would have been a nice place to start would be to look at these severe repetitive loss properties. and there's a definition here for more flood claims over 5,000 in the past 10 years. We really can't get access to a data set of severe repetitive loss properties for multiple reasons that people will understand here. So our second best approach, and we're going to define 4 scenarios. I'll go through them somewhat quickly. The SLR, so the sea level rise approach. Let's go ahead and take the maps that Jim and his group have produced for this 20-inch of sea level rise by 2050, and we'll remove essentially non-conforming lots, and we define those non-conforming lots as lots less than 10,000 square feet. So they're too small to be redeveloped in a very profitable fashion because they run afoul of many of the existing current zoning laws. So those are the ones we're going to target. And the first one, that's about 500 properties, I mean, assessed value about $234,000. Scenario 2, and we're just calling this the floodplain retreat, essentially. This is a big scenario, and this is thrown out there as kind of a, just so you realize the scope of trying to remove this a vast quantity of housing. So if we looked at this, all single family detached residential houses in a study area that are located within 100-year floodplain by 2050, so the changes in that, and also non-conforming lots. There's a lot of properties. 9,000 properties, mean assessed value about 290,000. We know it's unrealistic, but in our mind, it's a measure of a more full scope retreat. So it's kind of worth having out there as a stick in the ground. For the last 2 scenarios, we're going to include a notion of how much the property is worth. Now we want to be objective about this, so we're going to restrict the ranges of property values and wherever they fall with a notion of contiguity in there. So if we have 2 houses that fall within the assessed price ranges, we're looking for in a house in the middle that if it were also removed, there would be a contiguity bump for having the open space, then we'll do that. We'll take those. So these scenarios are going to focus on the value of the property rather than the income of the household, because we obviously don't have that data. It has the added advantage of being practical. It's going to be targeting the lower valued houses within the communities. You would expect the governments to be willing to buy those houses, and if these houses are in fact lower valued because of inundation type events, maybe these homeowners are more likely to participate in this kind of program. So the difference is scenario 3, same geography. So SFHA is the floodplains, what we're looking at for the geography there. Assessed values less than $250,000 with some contiguity consideration. That's scenario 3. Scenario 4, we're going to do the same as scenario 2 with the floodplain, and we're going to be focusing on improved values now, less than $60,000, again with some contiguity consideration. So in this case, let's get these numbers. Scenario 3 is about 2,000 properties, a mean assessed value of $154,000, and about 1,200 properties with a mean assessed value of $147,000, and an improvement value of about $64,000. And again, that's over the $60,000 because of the contiguity issues that we're looking at. So what we're here to talk about, and it's a lot of numbers. I spent some time trying to figure out how to make this clear, so I figured we'd spend a little bit of time on this slide. The first number to pay attention to, this is a net present value of the stream of revenues to 2050 with regard to the losses and the percentage recovery that we're looking at. So the only number on this table that is not a stream of revenue are the value numbers here. So in this case, this is 124 million assessed value removed in the scenario 1. In scenario 2, we're removing 2.7 billion. Scenario 3, we're removing 316 million from the tax roll, and in scenario 4, 181 million from the tax roll. The 42.6 is the stream of revenues that would be coming from those removed. So that's the difference in the 2 numbers. These numbers here are saying where are we recovering gains from neighboring houses in the view, gains from the neighbors in access to waterfront or now being waterfront, gains in open space, and again, that's for scenario 3 and 4 for those contiguity requirements, and gains in spillover values where neighboring houses may experience a bump because of the more dilapidated housing being removed. So the takeaway numbers from this, let's go scenario 1. You're looking at 42 million in lost revenues between now and 2050. Aggregating over the sources that we can aggregate over, you're going to come to an approximate recovery of about 5.4 million of that revenue stream from the neighboring houses, and that is about 12.7. I will make it 12.7%. I will make a note that these don't add up for reasons that Shinshin and I are clear on. And if he weren't defending his dissertation tomorrow, I would have probably asked him to go ahead and redo these without the adjustment for the nonlinearity of the price function, which is why this 12.7 doesn't add. The final scenario 4, we're looking at here. This is about 67 million in lost revenue stream, and you might recover 14.6% in that from the final in the final calculation. So I'm sure there'll be questions on this. I'll go ahead and bump and keep myself on the 20 minutes here. Simulations. These scenarios remove a lot of homes. These are our big retreats. We talked in some past circus situations or in conversations we've had. The numbers themselves, even though they're in hundreds of millions of dollars, are really not of the same kind of scale that many of the buyout discussions in other places in the country have been talking about. Very important to note that the numbers I've just put on there's a revenue stream, so this does not include the cost of actually buying the property. Okay, so that cost is not included in those numbers. Benefits are a fraction of the losses, but you should keep in mind our benefit measures are very, very far from comprehensive. Little things, scenario 1, we recover about 12%. You get more close to the coast properties. You get more gain from the up views as opposed to 3 and 4 when you're looking at values, because you're looking at lower priced or lower valued, assessed valued homes. You tend to get houses that are in the floodplain, but are not so coastfront as to pull a bunch of value from the views. But again, that number was around 14%. So future simulations, again, we had no real objective function in the simulations. We weren't trying to meet a target. If you were, you could meet conservation targets, perhaps budget targets, perhaps, or if we were to get more granular on where we should put these removals, you might see large infrastructure gains from very, very targeted removals in the towns or in the municipalities themselves. And I think that's it for my 20. I went to 21. That's not too bad. Thank you for your time. And should I unshare? Is that what I should do next?
Up to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tao. And we have actually questions that we can just right away start.
I'll keep it shared for now, just in case.
Okay. So the first question is about how active or how vigorous are insurance companies in alerting state and particularly local Connecticut governments in what's coming? Should they do more? And they also added a comment saying that seems like that their towns, waterfront residents don't want to acknowledge the impending costs.
So the insurance question is definitely not in my lane as far as what someone else on here might know more about what the insurance companies are actually signaling. What we're being, the insurance companies are, I would say, it's already a requirement that the homes taking a mortgage are picking up the NFIP insurance, right? So the insurance companies are just, the notion is they're less particularly aggressive in writing these kinds of loans. I guess I would say that. So it may be coming through the underwriting side and less through the insurance side itself. But yeah, that's about all I know on that.
Thank you. Can you please remind us how you calculate the stream revenues that is coming from the removed houses?
How we calculate the loss revenues or the gain?
How that stream of revenues comes from the removed houses.
Oh, okay. So the entire idea of this is once I remove a property, now I'm making the properties around me, they have a different set of amenities. So for example, the views that we just, let me see if I can go back to the view slide. It's maybe too far back. You can picture this. If I remove a house, then I've changed the view for all my neighbors. And so in the simulation, we have essentially recalculated all of the potential changes in view for all of the houses on the coast. And so if I remove a house, I've improved the view for the neighbors. Presumably that expanded view is going to slowly bump up in the assessed value as assessors take note and then that will cause a revenue stream, a new revenue stream from the increase in the neighboring assessed values. Same thing for waterfront, across the street waterfront, et cetera. Is that clear?
I think so.
Maybe.
And just to follow up, is it a stream of lost revenues?
Yeah, the other one are the streams of lost revenue. So you remove that house from the tax base, and we're essentially doing a net present value, a discounted net present value, the stream of lost revenues to get that total from that table. Okay.
Are the home market values in the presentation based on 2021 or 2050?
The assessed values or the which values? Did you say market values? Here we go.
Yeah, home market values.
The values are from, and if Shinshin is on this, he could chat in. I think that we've moved these to 2020 because we had the update from the Z-Tracks from the Zillow data file up to 2020. So I think we're using the most recent assessed values. The market values, if you wanted to go to market values, the transactions from the Hedonic are from market transactions. And those obviously occurred when the houses changed hands. So that could be anywhere from 2000 to 2020.
Given that Connecticut is or was the capital of insurance companies, is there a chance of collaborative project with the local governments in Connecticut?
Yeah, we'd love to. Yeah, we would. We mentioned this in the report as kind of the places where we need to integrate further. And in Shinshin's dissertation for tomorrow, it's really the things that we are measuring in this report are the values, the penalty to the price of a home for being in the floodplain is only 2% in this. Is it only 2% because we're not giving people enough information, or we're not giving them the right kind of information when they're making decisions to buy in the floodplain? As we've done this project, people hear that you're working on this and they're thinking about buying properties. I've had multiple conversations with people about how they should worry about buying a property in the floodplain. So it seems like there's ample space there for an information exchange.
Will the 12% gain be enough to cover the expenses for repairing state and municipal roads damaged in the floodplain?
I missed the first part of that, but is the question?
Will the 12% gain? Yeah.
No, we have nothing in this number with regard to any infrastructure, nor do we with this project. No, really, and it is a place where we should be doing further work is to determine how much do we spend on infrastructure from these inundation areas, and how much would we save from removal of specific homes. And that's where I think if the communities themselves know which homes maybe would provide the biggest return in infrastructure benefits. But no, we're not doing that here.
How closely does the assessed value track market value, and how does that vary by municipality in your study area?
So the assessed values in the state of Connecticut, and I may be wrong in the exact number, are 70% of the market values by design. The reassessment rates in Connecticut, as you all know, Connecticut is heavily dependent upon property taxes, and so these values track. I would say of all the states in the country, Connecticut's values for assessments probably track very closely to the actual market value.
We are on top of the hour, but we have a couple more questions if our attendees want to still listen. So we would like to answer them too. Can we compare the retreat scenario buyouts to corporate or government early retire program during an economic recession? For example, when highly paid executives are offered early retirement packages to leave the company or government before age of 65 is similar to the retreating before your mortgage is paid off. So
is the question, can we do that? Is that a policy question?
Can we compare the retreat scenario buyouts with the corporate or government early retirement program during an economic recession?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, we've
That's an
thought
interesting
through
question.
multiple ways to get to possible retreat scenarios in a couple of, let's put it this way: the state of New York does it a couple of different ways with the money from the Sandy recovery, where they would. Sometimes they'll buy the property and then remove it and manage it as a vacant piece of land. Sometimes they'll purchase the property and then auction the property to a developer under the premise that the developer will then make it a FEMA compliant resale. So there are certain ways that you can get to resiliency using the notion of a buyout. That maybe can save a little bit of funds, if that's what we're getting to with that.
Okay, this seems like that's the only question so far, and I would like to remind everybody that Dr. Tao and his team prepared a report, and it's actually like in the review process, and it will be available at the end of the month, so that you can actually reach it. We will email all the attendees, and then from the Resilience Roundup too. And just to remind everybody, our next presentation is also on a Friday from Dr. Liu about the modeling nearshore dynamics of extreme storms in complex environments of Connecticut. If you would like to review Dr. Tao and his team's work, you can reach the fact sheet from our website. And thank you so much, Dr. Tao. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.